I just like felt this pop, and then it was just like warmness that I felt. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you are new here, I hope you will consider subscribing and joining my YouTube family. And don't forget to hit that bell notification button so you don't miss when I post my next video. I knew that when I restarted my channel back in August of 2019 that I wanted to do this video, and I am finally now just getting to it. I've been pretty busy since the whole quarantine thing happened, but I figured that the timing on this video is actually pretty perfect because if you didn't know, April is C-section awareness month, and I did end up having a C-section, but I will get into that in a minute. I wanted to briefly talk about my pregnancy with Nori. If you didn't already see my video about getting pregnant with Nori, I will link that in the cards right here as well as below, but that basically talks all about the whole process and journey of me trying to get pregnant. But once I was finally pregnant with Nori, I just have a couple things that I want to talk about before I get into the whole birth story. I do have a couple notes here in my phone. When I was pregnant with Nori, I had the Baby Bump app and I kept a lot of notes in there, but I did receive an email like maybe a year or so ago that they were shutting down that app, so I actually went in there and kind of screenshotted some of my notes just so I could have them for future reference. But overall, I did have a fairly easy pregnancy. And when I say easy, I don't think any pregnancy is really that easy. You're growing a human inside of you. There are going to be parts of it that are pretty rough, but overall, my pregnancy wasn't that bad. I didn't have any morning sickness. I did get a little nauseous in the beginning, like the first 5-6 weeks of pregnancy, but it really wasn't that bad at all, so I was really thankful for that. The only other thing that was worth mentioning that I had early on in the beginning was I had back-to-back colds, and that kind of sucked. So I got pregnant in December of 2016, and then January and February I had a cold. And when you're pregnant, you can't really take much of anything, so that really sucked for me. The one really strange thing that happened to me during my pregnancy was I sneezed once a day, every single day. It was so weird. I don't really know if that's a symptom or whatever, but it just something that happened to me every day and I noticed it. And then I did have sciatica, so I had a lot of pressure on my tailbone. So anytime I had to sit for a long period, I kind of like shifted to my side and kind of sat like sideways, and I think that ended up kind of messing me up in the long run, but that's a whole other story for a different day. And then another thing I actually had was pregnancy-induced carpal tunnel. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but I'm not really sure what causes it. I didn't Google it too much, but my doctor did confirm that that's what it was. Whenever I would go to sleep, I would wake up and I would have these like tingling sensations in my hands. Like my hands would pretty much go numb. Even when I would try to do my makeup, I would get tingly hands, and the doctor did recommend to put some like braces, like wrist braces, to like keep my hand, both of my hands, like, I don't know, propped a certain way, but that was pretty uncomfortable. But it was something that I knew wouldn't last forever. I knew once I was not pregnant anymore, it would pretty much go away, and it did, so it was fine. And then the most major thing that happened in my pregnancy was I had gestational diabetes. I was diagnosed with that at 28 weeks. You do the whole glucose test. I can't remember the timing of when I did the glucose test, but you drink the drink and then 1 hour later they take your blood and see how your body processes the sugar. And so I ended up failing that, and then they send you for a 3-hour test where they take your blood initially, and then you drink the drink, and then they take your blood at the 1 hour mark, the 2 hour mark, and the 3 hour mark to see how long it takes your body to process the glucose. And so I failed that as well. Not by a lot, but it was enough to have them diagnose me with gestational diabetes. So that was pretty difficult. I cried when I found out that I had it, just because I knew that that was going to be something that was going to be really difficult. And It was, but at the same time, I got used to it eventually. I had to prick my finger every single day, 3 times, actually, like 4 times a day. It was tough to manage, but I was able to do it and it ended up being fine. I only ended up gaining like 17 pounds during my pregnancy, so I think that kind of helped me out because I wasn't eating as much as I could have. I had to be very, very conscious about what I ate. But if you guys are curious about that whole situation with gestational diabetes and you want me to do a separate video on it, I can do that as well. So let me know in the comments below if you want me to do a video on that. Okay, so I'm gonna insert a montage right here of my pregnancy with Nori. I did take weekly pictures and I love that I documented that, so enjoy this montage.
I could stay like this, forever following you. Just don't get too far, and I'll be right where you are. You're a dream that I could finally see. I just want us to always be, to always be.
When I gave birth to Nori back in August of 2017, shortly after I gave birth, when I was resting, I ended up taking several notes about my birth story in the notes section of my phone. I wanted to make sure that I remembered everything and that I could reference back to it someday. Since I had gestational diabetes, doctors usually want you to give birth by your due date. So my doctor told me that I would be induced a few days before my due date. So I ended up, I think my due date was on a Monday, so it was like August 28th, and I was induced Thursday night, so it was the 24th. The doctor made an appointment for me at 9 p.m. that Thursday night to get induced with the labor and delivery department of the hospital that I gave birth at. Since I knew the day and the time that I would be going to get induced, I made sure that I indulged in whatever food I wanted to eat that day. So throughout the entire pregnancy, I couldn't, well, not throughout the entire pregnancy, but the last 12 weeks of my pregnancy, I was on a strict diet. I actually had a friend who also went through the same thing with gestational diabetes, and she had told me to eat whatever I wanted the day of getting induced because I wouldn't be able to eat anything once the whole induction process started. So Frank and I went to one of our favorite breakfast spots that morning, and I ended up getting blueberry pancakes, eggs, bacon, you name it, I ate it all. And right before we went to the hospital, I ended up just eating a salad just to make sure that I wasn't going to be hungry. Sorry if I keep looking down at my phone, I'm looking at my notes. So I went into the hospital 9 p.m. and they got me registered. I filled out any paperwork, and I also shared with them my birth plan. I just kind of found a template online for a birth plan. I don't remember exactly where I found it. If I can find it, I'll link it below. But I just kind of jotted down a couple things. I followed that template and just filled it out. Anything specific that I wanted. I knew I wanted delayed cord clamping, so I ended up putting that in there. And I wanted to avoid C-section at all costs, but that didn't end up happening. So once I got registered and everything, the first thing that they did was check me for any labor progress. So at the time, I was close to 2 centimeters dilated. I was 80% effaced, and I was at -3 station. Some of you might not know what that is, but if you attended a birth class, or if you plan to attend a birth class, these are the types of things that they will tell you about. Once they found that out, then they started me on my first dose of Cytotec at 11:15 p.m. So just to give you an idea of timing, I got to the hospital around 9, and then 11:15 p.m. is when they started me on medication. Cytotec is used to thin the lining of the uterus to get you ready to give birth, basically. And then after the first dose of Cytotec, I was 2.5 centimeters dilated, still only 80% effaced, and then I was at a -2 station. So she only descended a very, very tiny bit after that first dose of Cytotec. And then I had my second dose of Cytotec at 3:30 a.m. Between the first dose and the second dose of Cytotec was when my contractions really started to get intense. So I ended up asking for pain meds, not the epidural, but just pain meds in my IV, and they gave me that at 4 a.m. So this was Thursday night into Friday morning, and I was actually able to sleep a few hours. And then at 8 a.m. they started me on Pitocin, which is the drug form of oxytocin, which helps get active labor started. After the nurse gave me Pitocin, she had kind of prepped me and told me that probably around 11 a.m. the doctor is going to want to break my water. And when I heard that, I was like, okay, can we make sure that I get the epidural before you break my water? Because I heard that once your water is broken, that's when contractions can start to be really, really, really intense. And I kind of didn't want to wait too long to ask for the epidural, because I have also heard that sometimes that can take a long time for the anesthesiologist to make it to your room. So a lot of my other friends who have had babies told me that once you think you're ready for the epidural, ask for it right away, so that it gives them time to get to your room. So the anesthesiologist got into the room like pretty much on time, like right around 11. And so they sat me up, and I was having contractions while they were prepping me to get the epidural. And as soon as the anesthesiologist told me to curve my back so that he could stick the needle in, doing that motion actually made my water break on its own. I just like felt this pop, and then it was just like warmness that I felt. So I was like, I think my water just broke. And the nurse like checked, she's like, yeah, it did. I was like, wow, that was really, really weird. It just felt so crazy that, you know, I was just about to get my epidural, and then all of a sudden it broke on its own. So after I got the epidural, they laid me back down and made sure that I couldn't feel anything, and which I couldn't. I needed help to move my legs around. And so they decided to check me again. At that time, I was 3 centimeters dilated, 90% effaced, and still only at -2 station. So in between when I first got to the hospital up until this point, I only dilated 1 centimeter. That was honestly pretty disappointing. Every time I got checked, I was like hoping and praying that I progressed a little more, but you know, that didn't end up happening. So between 11 a.m. and then 1:15 p.m. they checked me again, and I still hadn't progressed anything. This time I didn't dilate anymore, and Nori also didn't descend anymore. This whole time that they were checking me, it was pretty much just the nurses, but the doctor came in after that 1:15 p.m. check, and she kind of sat on my bed and she was like, look, you're not progressing the way we would like you to, and every time you have a contraction, the baby's heart rate would dip. So I knew that that meant that this could potentially end up in a C-section. They said that they'll let me go a little bit longer because they could tell that I was pretty disappointed that they were heading towards saying that I would need a C-section. So I had asked if I could try the peanut ball, because one of my friends mentioned that. They call it the peanut ball because it is in the shape of a peanut. It kind of dips in the middle, and so they stick that part in between your legs and then make you sit to the side, so that can kind of encourage your hips to open up, and then encourage the baby to descend a little more. So I tried 15 minutes on my left side and then 15 minutes on my right side, and then they ended up checking me again. So once they checked me again, that is when they knew, like, look, you didn't progress at all in that half an hour, so I'm so sorry, but we're gonna have to call C-section. Once that call was made to do the C-section, everything happened so fast. When I talk about this story with other people, I kind of describe it like a scene change in a Broadway show where like the stage crew comes in and they're like moving equipment around and bringing the new parts of the scene in. That's what it felt like. Like I felt like people were moving my bed around. Doctors, anesthesiologists, people were coming in, injecting me with stuff. They were injecting me with like antibiotics. Because that's another thing. I tested positive for group B strep. So that is something that when you give birth, you could pass on to the baby. So they injected me with medicine for that, and then they gave me more numbing medicine. For the epidural, instead of being numb from the waist down, they were trying to numb me from the chest down. And then they handed this like white zip up suit to Frank to get him prepped, and so they started like taking my bed away into the operating room. And Frank was like, whoa, wait, like, I'm not ready yet. And they were like, no, we have to go get her prepped first, and then we'll come back and get you. Like, don't worry, you're not gonna miss anything. They took me into the operating room. It was very, very cold and sterile. I was actually shivering, and I was like, why am I shaking so much? And the nurse was like, that's pretty normal. It's pretty cold in this room, so it's fine. You're fine. I'm not gonna lie, it was a pretty scary, not scary, but like everything was just happening so fast, so it kind of freaked me out a little bit. I had never had surgery before prior to that, so I had no experience with that. Well, I did experience one minor surgery when I had to get that D&E when I had my miscarriage, but you know, this is major surgery. They had to cut me open, so I was kind of freaking out. But all the nurses and the doctors were really great. They were super nice, so that was reassuring. Once we got to the operating room, the anesthesiologist was like right by my right shoulder, and he was like poking my arm. He's like, can you feel this? Can you feel this? And I was like, no. And he's like, okay, good, she's ready. So they had to make sure that I couldn't feel anything. Right after they got me set up, Frank came into the room, and he was right up by my head on the left side. He kept like standing up and looking, and he was like, do you guys care if I like watch what you're doing? Because they put like that big curtain up. And they were like, no, we don't mind, as long as you feel like you're not gonna pass out, right? And he's like, no, I think I'm good, or whatever. He's like, I just wanna watch what you're doing. So he pretty much watched the whole thing, and the nurses and doctors were really, really impressed with him. Like, I can't believe you're standing and watching this, and you don't look queasy, you don't look pale, you don't look like you're gonna pass out. So they were super impressed, and they were like, can we use you as an example because you're so calm and reassuring? Because not only was he watching, but he was like rubbing my arm and checking on me, making sure I was doing okay. When we were discussing our birth plan, he asked the doctor if he could catch the baby. So, I mean, I guess this was the next best thing for him to be able to do and take part in. 3:17 p.m. on August 25th, 2017, Noriel Francis came into this world screaming her head off. She was 7 pounds, 3 ounces, and 19 3/4 inches long. And right after they cleaned her off and showed her to me, I was completely in love. And at the time we had 3 top names that we were choosing between, and we didn't want to officially pick her name until we saw her. And so Frank took a look at me and said, what do you think? And I was like, definitely Noriel. I'm almost getting emotional thinking about it, just because even though it wasn't the birth story that I would have liked for myself, you know, she came out healthy and everything worked out. I was fine, and my recovery was actually not that bad at all. I was up and walking the next day, so I'm just very grateful that it ended up working out the way that it did. But that is gonna be it for this video. I hope that you guys enjoyed hearing my birth story. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up. And if you're a mama Feel free to leave me some comments down below and tell me a little bit about your birth story. If you haven't already, please hit that red subscribe button. I will catch you next time. Bye. So, I think there was just like several motorcycles just driving by just now. Alright, go ahead. Drive your loud car by. People do donuts on my street sometimes. I don't understand it. I can't.